So again, this week we are learning about economics, the chapter, and again, it's chapter 1 of the textbook. It's titled Understanding Economic Systems and Businesses. Okay. You all saw this just worked, right? And then I walk away from the computer and now it doesn't work. I don't know why that happened. Okay, here we go. So these are the learning objectives for this week. How do businesses and nonprofits help influence our standard of living? I know up here it says not-for-profit. I usually say nonprofit, but it's the same thing. So there's two different terms for the same thing. We'll look at the internal and the external elements of businesses. Okay, so what are the factors inside a business that influence its success? But what are the factors from outside the business that have an influence? We'll look at the different economic systems in the world, again, like communism, socialism, and capitalism. We'll talk about the sectors of the US economy, which are households, governments, and businesses. We'll talk about different ways we can measure a nation's economic health. That would be like GDP, or the unemployment rate, or the inflation rate. We'll learn the difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy, okay? We'll get to that later. We'll look at supply and demand. That is a fundamental concept in economics. Prices are determined in large part by how much demand there is for the product and how much of a supply there is. Okay, so we'll learn about how those dynamics work. We will talk about different market structures. Again, monopoly would be one example. Probably most of you are familiar with the game Monopoly. So we'll understand what a monopoly is, what are the pros and cons of monopolies, and then some of the other market structures that are not monopolies. And as always, we'll look at trends related to this chapter. So quite a bit to cover. So let's start with something pretty basic. Revenue, costs, and profit. Who can tell me what is meant by the term revenue? What does that word mean?
Income.
Income, okay. Yes, it's what a company has earned by providing their product or service, is revenue. So it is the technical, the gross income of the company. Then if you subtract the costs, you get the profit. So that is a basic formula in business. Revenue minus your costs equals your profit. What happens if your costs are more than your revenue? It's not good, right? That means your company is losing money. And in some cases, that's okay. When Amazon first got started, it was losing money for about 5 years. It was not making a profit, but it was growing so quickly that investors kept investing more money, and eventually it became one of the most profitable companies in the world. So for a while, you can get away with losing money, but eventually, if you keep losing money, you're going to go out of business, right?
No, it was a strategy from Amazon. It was a hook to take the people with it.
To get the customers?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times, yeah, companies will start in a way where their products are very inexpensive in order to attract customers, or maybe even free, right? Like when Facebook came out, well, I guess it still is free, but there were not even any ads on Facebook initially. And it was free. So it's like, well, how are they making money? And they weren't even sure how they were going to make money, and they finally figured out a way to do it. So yeah, sometimes companies will operate at a loss for a period of time until they get a big enough following of customers, and then they'll start to monetize it. But the thing is, you have to be careful, because if your company is losing money, you get to a point where you can't pay your bills, you're basically forced to go out of business, right? So this formula is really important. And you always, well, in general, you want your revenue to be more than your costs so that you make a profit. All right, are there any questions on that? Okay, Next, let's talk about the 5 factors of production. These are the things that companies use to make a product or service. Let's look at what they are. First of all would be resources.
Mhm.
Now, here's a graphic that helps illustrate it, right? We see a farm, maybe an orchard too. And the farmer needs seeds, right? Plant. The farmer needs water, fertilizer. Those would all be examples of resources that they're using for production. Make sense? Most businesses also need labor, right? We can see in the image, there's somebody picking the fruit. So that's human labor. Then there's capital. This word is a little bit harder to define. Capital can be money, but it could also be other things that are valuable. But what makes them capital is when they're used in order to grow a business. So in this picture, you see that there's a tractor over here. Well, a tractor is capital. It's something valuable that's used in this business. It wouldn't apply to something small like the seeds or the water that I mentioned, but expensive things like equipment, like buildings, can be considered capital, as can the money that investors invest into a business. Okay? Keep that in mind. And that's where the word capitalism comes from, right? The whole idea is investors invest into a business to help grow the business and then hopefully make a profit. Then we have knowledge. A farmer that doesn't know how to farm is probably not going to be successful, right? And then the 5th factor of production is entrepreneurship. Somebody had to have the idea to start this farm, right? To go out and buy the seeds, and figure out what to plant. That all takes planning and initiative, energy, and that comes from entrepreneurship. All right, so those 5 factors are what go in to making a business and making it successful. Adriana?
Yeah, I was just commenting, if it's capital, it's a tax write-off because it's produced for the business, right? Or
well, let me think. So if an investor buys stock, that is considered capital. That is not a tax write-off. However, if the company uses the money to buy a tractor, they do write off that expense over time. So that part would be a tax write-off. But the same thing could be true for the seeds and the water and any other expense that also reduces their cost. So anytime a company has an expense of any kind, that does reduce their income tax liability. And when you take accounting, we'll go into a lot of detail on how that all works. Any other comments or questions? So here's a question here. What is the role of an entrepreneur in society? How would the United States be different if we didn't have any more entrepreneurs? Less exciting. Less exciting? Okay, and why is that?
Less Elon Musk and Facebook and all,
Okay. Okay. So Andrew's point is correct. We would have less innovation of new products and services.
we
Adriana?
probably have to pay more to export like products that are no longer available in this country.
Okay, yeah. So if we don't have entrepreneurs creating products and services, then we'd have to bring them in from other countries, and that would probably cost us more than if we made them here, especially in some industries. Yeah. So entrepreneurs play a really important role. They create new businesses. When those businesses are successful, the businesses are paying taxes, hiring people, creating products and services, creating competition. All of those things are good for an economy. And that's why entrepreneurs are really valued in the US economic system. Okay, let's move on. So as I mentioned, we will look at both the internal and external environments of businesses. Businesses are started by entrepreneurs. They are run by managers and have workers as well, right? So those are the employees inside the company. This graphic puts customers as part of the internal aspect of the business. You can see it either way, internal or external. But the point is, these are things that the company really has some control over. There are other things outside the company that it really doesn't have much control over. Let's look at those. The economy. Economies go up and down. And that can influence businesses by either creating opportunities or creating challenges. The political and legal environment. Laws get passed all the time that sometimes help businesses or hurt businesses. Countries can go to war, for example. That hurts most businesses, helps others. There are demographic shifts. Who can tell me what is meant by this term demographic?
The type of people that live in a center place, like they're
Okay, yeah.
Latino, different races,
exactly.
diversity.
When you take a population and you divide it up into different groups to better understand the needs of those groups, the interests of those groups, we call that demographics. And you find that over time, these groups shift. So you might have, for example, here in the United States, would you say, is our population getting older or younger? What do you think? Yeah, older, because families are having fewer kids than they used to, and people are living longer than they used to. So the average age is increasing in the United States. So that's a demographic shift that creates opportunities for some businesses and challenges for things like K through 12 schools that teach young kids. Well, if you don't have as many kids, you don't need as many schools, right? So that's a problem for them.
And we don't get as much money.
We don't get as much money from taxpayers. Yeah, exactly, right? So these are challenges. Where there are other countries where their average age is getting younger and they have a different set of problems. So that's an example of demographic shifts that can impact businesses and organizations. There are social changes, how society views certain things. That can create opportunities and challenges. The competitive environment. The more companies you have competing with you, the harder it's going to be successful, right? We've already talked about the global environment. We had a whole chapter about importing and exporting. That can impact businesses. And then technology is changing so quickly, right? And that creates opportunities and challenges. So all of these factors in the external environment can influence a business. And it's important to be successful to understand all those dynamics and be able to make decisions. Like, I'll give you an example. Kodak used to be, probably the top company in the camera film industry, because a lot of people had cameras. They bought film to put in their cameras, and they tended to buy Kodak film. Well, what happened? Digital cameras came out, right? And at first they were too expensive and people didn't want to switch, but they realized over time that, hey, this is better, it's cheaper, let's switch to digital. Kodak did not make that transition fast enough, and they lost their customers. I think they're still around, but you hardly ever hear about Kodak anymore because they missed that opportunity. Blockbuster Video was another one, right? Netflix came along.
Panavision.
Well, Panavision, yeah, that's another example. With Blockbuster, if you remember them, they decided to keep their retail stores and keep renting out videos the way that they used to, and DVDs. But Redbox was setting up kiosks. Blockbuster finally came out with kiosks, but they were a little bit too late. Netflix was mailing DVDs to people, right? And Blockbuster was like, oh, we don't need to do that. And then Netflix started to stream videos. Blockbuster tried to do that, but they were too late. If they had been paying more attention to the external environment, how society was changing, how technology was changing, they could have adapted faster and stayed in business. All right. Any questions, any comments? All right, let me do a quick time check here. We'll cover this slide and then I'll show you that video I mentioned. Let's talk a little more about demographics. What we see here are some charts that look at some demographics in a particular population. This is just really for your for illustration here. So this group of people has been divided up by age. So you see these different age ranges and what amount of the population falls into each of those age ranges. So that can be helpful for marketers that are trying to promote a product to understand who are the different ages of people, right? And figure out who might be most interested in this product. You can divide up groups of people by many ways, by religion, by country of birth. And the point is not to discriminate. The point is to understand these populations. So if anybody here goes into marketing as a field, we will have a couple of chapters where we focus on marketing. It's really important you understand who is your target customer. What is that?
Obviously, you know how you can sell to them.
Yes, exactly, right? If I'm trying to sell, what's an example? If I'm trying to sell protein powder for weightlifters, okay? Not everybody's gonna wanna buy that because not everybody's a weightlifter, right? So if I look at the entire population and I think, okay, who am I going to advertise to? I wanna find the right age group, the right geographic area, right? Whatever will help define the people that are most likely to buy my product, and that way I advertise specifically to them. And that's why in marketing, it's useful to understand demographics. Any questions on that concept? So one more thing I want to mention before we see the video, you notice it says here SWOT analysis. I don't think the textbook talks about SWOT analysis, but I'll mention it now, and then it's going to be relevant later in the semester. Towards the end of the semester, you're going to do a business plan outline presentation, and you'll have to come up with a SWOT analysis at that time. So we'll be talking about it again later in the semester, but let me just explain to you what it is right now, because it relates to these internal and external aspects of business. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what this analysis is when you look at a company's internal strengths and weaknesses, right? So you look at who are the employees, what is our product, and what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses. But then you look at the external environment, and that's where you look at what are the opportunities that are out there that we can pursue, and what are the threats that might get in the way. Okay, and once you've done that analysis, it'll be much easier to create your long-term strategy. Remember how we talked about strategic planning? Because you'll know what are the strengths and weaknesses, and what are the opportunities and threats. All right, any questions? So let me show you that video. Again, it's only about 5 minutes long, and as you're viewing it, think about what questions you have. Okay. So let's get into Actually, let's talk about this first. What is the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics? You can tell me.
Big and little.
Jaden, right? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I guess macroeconomics would be a larger scale.
Okay.
Microeconomics.
Yeah, so, and Andrew said it as well. Macro means big and micro means small, right? So macroeconomics, and both, by the way, if you're a business major, these are both required courses. We have some great economics instructors that will teach you about both macro and microeconomics. Now, macro is big. So again, it's looking at the economy of a country as a whole, whereas microeconomics applies it to an individual organization. So how do economics impact an individual business? That's my best explanation for you. Now, let's talk about the difference between capitalism, which, as it says here, is growing around the world, communism, which is in decline, and socialism, which is also very popular. This graphic on the right is just for illustration, just to say that both capitalism and communism are imperfect. You could be, have whatever economic opinion you want, but no economic system solves all problems, right? And they're all prone to corruption. Andrew, I saw your hand.
Yeah, does microeconomics, does that fall under like a demographic? Or is it mainly just internal?
Well, demographics tie into both. So for example, in macroeconomics, you would understand how are demographic shifts impacting the economy as a whole. But in microeconomics, you'd be looking at how do these demographic shifts impact individual companies. So capitalism is growing around the world because it does lead to innovation. It does create opportunity for great wealth. Communism has been declining because, well, the Soviet Union collapsed back in 1991, I think it was. I spent more than a year in Russia and Ukraine. That was between 92 and 94. I was over there. And so I got to be there when it was no longer communist, but it was still very communist. It had just transformed and they hadn't quite figured out how to have a democracy and a market-based economy yet. So it was an interesting experience, but there aren't too many communist countries left in the world. Yeah. And if you think about Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, much of Central and South America, I'd say most of the countries in the world would fall into the category of socialist. So let's look at what is the difference between these different economic systems. In communism, the government controls the products and services that are created. So you don't really have private businesses. Government basically controls everything. What's that?
No entrepreneurs.
No entrepreneurs, that's right. And that would be an example of North Korea. They really, their government really controls everything. At the other extreme, if you had pure competition or capitalism, the idea is that companies could make whatever they want. Anybody could start a company, produce products and services, charge whatever they want. The United States is one of the most capitalist countries in the world, but we're not completely capitalist. There are some services we get from our government. We get police, military, fire department, public schools, public health. These are all services our government provides to us, and those are social. Yeah, roads, exactly. libraries. These are all social services that are funded by our taxes. So that makes us not completely capitalist. We are, as it says here, capitalist leaning, but we've got some socialist elements in our system. Social security is another example of that. That is a socialist system. So there really aren't too many countries in the world that are completely communist or completely capitalist. Most countries are somewhere on the spectrum here in between, where they could be defined as some sort of socialist country, where some products and services are provided by companies and some products and services are provided by governments. And that would be a more socialist country. Socialist countries tend to have higher taxes than a more capitalist country like ours. But we pay our fair amount of taxes as well, right? So for example, if you live in France or Sweden, God bless you, which are socialist countries, you get free college education.
Yes.
You get free healthcare. We don't have that in this country, right? We used to. The University of California system, the Cal States, the community colleges in California all used to have free tuition. Right? But not anymore. Venezuela, what's that?
Was it not profitable? That's why they stopped her.
Something else that changed under Reagan. And is it not, well, is it not profitable? That's a good question. The point of public education is not necessarily a profit, right? Right? Like high schools are still free. They're not designed to make a profit. They're designed to educate the population. So at some point in the 80s, no, actually, I think it was even earlier. I think it started when Reagan was governor of California. I don't remember what years that was, but he, you know, from what I understand, he decided that it was time to start charging, and then those prices just keep going up and up and up. Could we fund public education? Sure. If European countries can do it, why can't we do it? Could we provide free healthcare to all Americans? Yeah. Other socialist countries could do it. Why couldn't our mostly capitalist country do it? It's a choice. It's a choice. Venezuela is a very socialist country. They are having some major economic and political issues right now. That's its own topic. China is interesting because China was a communist country. They saw what happened to the Soviet Union. They saw that when the Soviet Union decided to no longer be communist, well, actually, the Soviet Union never actually considered itself communist. They thought they were working towards communism. But regardless, when they decided to not be the Soviet Union anymore, to break up into multiple republics that could each have whatever political and economic system it wanted, well, they tried to be democratic, but honestly, if you look at Russia today, it's not really a democracy. People don't really get to exercise their vote. If they protest, they could be put in prison. The votes, according to international observers, the votes are rigged. So they don't really have a democracy in Russia. And, you know, my wife is Russian, so, and I've lived there. So I am talking here from experience. We still have family members over there. And if you look at their economy, when the Soviet Union collapsed, unfortunately, it allowed a small number of people to take over that economy, and it's really run more like organized crime than like a healthy market-based economy. And so China looked at that and said, okay, we're not going to do that. We see that we have a problem operating as a communist country in China, We see our population is growing. We need to create jobs for people. So what we're going to do in China is we are going to have a market-based economy. So we're going to open up our economy so that entrepreneurs can start businesses and compete with each other. And we won't be communist economically, but we will still be ruled by the Communist Party of China. So politically, they're still communist, but economically, they're capitalist. And that has actually worked pretty well for China. They've been able to grow their economy at about double the pace of the US economy. So it seems to be a pretty good balance for them. I think a lot of the political tension in the United States is that people are saying, well, we need to catch up with China, but how can we do it if we have these political parties that are fighting? China just has one political party and it can do whatever it wants, right?
Here, no. Here, no. It's liberal and no conservatives.
Yeah.
Most of the Republicans make a mess. Sometimes they think about their own values
Right.
rather than the whole code.
Exactly. We've got two political parties fighting with each other and not doing the things that need to be done, right? Which is terrible. So I'm not saying that we should have only one party.
We need to
I'm not a political scientist, but I am saying that that's how many people feel. They look at China and its ability to do whatever it wants and says, why can't we do that here in the United States? And it's because we have this two-party system, right? I mean, we have more than two parties, but there are only really two parties that have significant power. Okay, so we see here the spectrum: communism, capitalism. Really, most countries are somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the socialism spectrum. Any questions or comments? Okay. I think that's a good. I'll cover this slide real fast, and then we'll do our video discussion.
China.
This is an interesting graphic that compares the states in the United States. It compares their economies with other countries. So if you see, California is the state that has the highest GDP. We produce more in California than any other state. If you look at all the products and services we produce. In fact, we produce as much as the United Kingdom, which is multiple countries combined. California is, as far as I know, the 5th largest economy in the world, bigger than most of the countries' economies.
Is it true that California could,
Valentino, right?
Yeah.
I mean, economically, yes, California
Is it
could
true?
exist on its own. Politically, no. Our Constitution would require that the majority of the states would have to approve that. That would never happen. But in theory, yeah, economically, we could. But- What's that?
We produce a lot of gross domestic.
Yeah,
products, a lot of service and a lot of technology.
exactly. Tech companies are headquartered here, agriculture, entertainment, a lot of big industries here in California. And we benefit by being part of the United States, right? Okay, and then if you look up here, you can see the GDP of China, that's the black line, how it's really been moving quicker than the GDP of the US, even though ours is still higher, at least as of 2020. At this point, I think China's catching up to us. But you can also see the European Union, they've kind of been struggling a bit. I think a lot of that has to do with Brexit. The United Kingdom deciding to leave, I guess technically Britain deciding to leave the European Union, caused a lot of issues for the economy in Europe. So anyways, interesting information. Let's go ahead and take 8 minutes to do our group discussions. Go ahead and divide into your groups of 4 or more, okay? The video discussion activity. Grow will be on Thursday.
Okay.
Okay.
Any comments? All right, let's go ahead and cover a couple more slides. So here we see the three sectors of the US economy. That would be households, companies, and government. So as you see, there's a lot going on this graphic here, but people in households, individuals and families buy things, which gives money to companies, right? And they work, so they get paid either by the companies they work for or government agencies they work for. And we know that financial institutions are in the middle, right? They are intermediaries that process all these financial transactions. We get certain services from the government. We pay taxes back to the government, and companies pay taxes too. You see these three aspects of the economy: households, businesses, governments, all interact, and it creates a healthy economic system. We do also import from other countries, but those are companies too, right? When we import, we're importing from other companies. So this helps illustrate these three sectors and how important each one is. We didn't have companies, most of the products and services we rely on wouldn't be available. If we didn't have governments, who would be in control? Who would, make sure that we're all able to get from one place to another, able to go to school, able to live in communities, right? So these three sectors are critical to our economic system. All right, economies in general tend to grow, especially if the population is growing, then the economy tends to grow with it. But it doesn't really grow in a straight line like this. It grows by going up and down and up and down. When it's going up, that is an economic expansion. When the economy is going down, that's called a contraction. And it's just part of the process. We have been in an economic expansion, except for COVID, which kind of set us back a little bit. But otherwise, really since 2008, our economy has been expanding. So don't be surprised if we have a recession sometime in the coming years. That's just a normal part of the process. It's not fun, but it is normal. One way we measure economic health is the unemployment rate. The lower the unemployment rate, the better, because it means that it's easier for people to find jobs. If there are a lot of people that are unemployed and we have a high unemployment rate, then they're all competing for the jobs that are available, right? And it's harder. Right now, I don't know if you know this, but we have historically low unemployment rates. This is a really good time to be looking for a job. It doesn't mean that all the jobs that are out there are great, but the number of opportunities compared to the number of job seekers right now is really good. So we may come into a time in the coming years where there aren't as many jobs available and it's more competitive to try to find a decent job. In fact, the unemployment rate really can't get too much lower than it is now. What would happen if everybody who wanted a job had a job? Yeah, there's no more competition, and that means that the employers would have to start raising how much they're willing to pay in order to attract the employees, right? They're doing it a little bit right now, but they have to do it a lot. And when they start raising pay, they're probably also going to raise their prices and charge consumers more for whatever they sell. Okay, the last concept we will talk about, we are about out of time. I'm just going to say supply and demand is a key aspect of economics. I'll go over it on Thursday. See you all Thursday.
Thank you. I'm gonna have fun with the Panther Boston Mountain.
I'm sure you will, Eric. I look forward to it.
Yeah.